Good morning and welcome to another live We Are Sunderland morning briefing. We're coming to you on Friday, the 8th of March. I'm Joe Ramage and I'm joined by Matty Hewitt. We're coming to you in partnership with the Sunderland Fans Museum and Cospex Opticians. Sunderland Fans Museum is the place for all of your pre-match entertainment, as well as plenty of good community work that they do through the week around mental health. You know, we were down there a fortnight ago now, wasn't it, Matty? You're doing our first live show. Big shout out to everyone who came down to there, by the way. I'm not sure if we've mentioned that yet. It was a good night, and hopefully we can bring more of them to you as the year goes on. Matty, Sunderland against Southampton this weekend. You know, the game as it stands, it looks as though it's going to be on. You know, there was a big fire down at St Mary's the other day. Early sessions seem to think that the game's going to be on, you know, the opening parts of the ground today for staff to go into. That's obviously a positive. I know some Sunderland fans might think otherwise, but yeah, game's going to be going ahead. I think. What are your initial thoughts heading into this weekend? You're going to be down there this weekend.
Yeah, first of all, obviously, I just hope nobody was hurt in that fire. But it doesn't do. Mike Dodds was asked about it yesterday. It doesn't do Sunderland any favours in the sense of Southampton have now had more time off. Granted, you know, it's one of those things, isn't it? I don't think there's anything you can do about it. In terms of the game, big one, isn't it? I mean, it's St Mary's isn't somewhere that Sunderland have technically fared too bad. There is, of course, that 8-0 defeat, I think. But in recent years, they've not done too bad down there, I don't think. I think Nick Barnes was telling us yesterday it's something like 3 draws from the last few trips there. So, you know, I don't want to say a draw is a good result, but I'm going to say it because I think just in the current run of form, look, you can't get away from it. The need wins. But at the minute, in that current run of form where, look, it's 5 defeats on the trot, if you lose again, you are in serious danger of looking over your shoulder. And again, I don't think Sunderland will be relegated, but I'm speaking at this current moment in time. I think there's teams below them who are worse off. But if they don't start winning games, you're going to lose that momentum, and that's massive in the Championship. I think that's something that plenty of managers have spoken about. Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it, that before Southampton, if we sort of go back to the start of the year, Southampton themselves were in a run of form where I think there was actually people calling for Russell Martin to leave when they came up to the Stadium of Light and Sunderland won 5-0. Mike Dodds spoke about it yesterday at his press conference. That win over Southampton actually probably did Southampton the world of good because they went on a 20-odd game unbeaten run after that, and they're right up there. And I think just from having watched Russell Martin's teams in the past, obviously he was at MK Dons, they've got a clear way of playing. They look like they're finally getting, or they are getting to grips with what he wants down there. Now, again, it's such a tough trip for Sunderland, and they haven't fared well on the road this season, have they?
No, they haven't, and it's really tough, like you say, after the run of games. Just quickly go back as well, you know, that 8-0 highlighted by a classic Santiago Virginie own goal, I think. But hopefully none of the same this weekend. But yeah, whatever way it means possible, they just need to stop this run of defeats, because as much as I think in the second half on Tuesday there were positive signs, you know, against the Leicester side who could very well go up, you know, it would be surprising if they don't go up. The young group, as Mike Dodds will often refer to, you have to wonder how much it'll impact their mentality the longer this goes on. You know, Sunderland haven't been on a losing streak like this for the best part of 10 years in the league, 5 games in a row. And given the average age of the squad, that is going to be difficult to deal with. Throw in all the expectations and the pressure around it, and, you know, the sort of sense that the season, if it hasn't already, then it's fizzling, or if it hasn't already, it has fizzled out. You know, the playoffs look a very, very tough ask now. You know, that they're not good. Realistically, they're not going to make the playoffs 10-point gap. They just need to stop this run of defeats and then look to build. So I take your point about it, a draw in this case being a good result. I think I said the other night that a draw probably wouldn't be because of the need for points over the course of last week. But yeah, just to stop this run of defeats and then look to build from there. I mean, realistically, and we'll probably look at again upon reflection of the game, Sunderland probably need the international break that's coming up next weekend, or the weekend after rather. You know, there's a lot of times where an international break can come at the wrong time for teams. I think regardless of what happens in these next 2 games, it's going to come at a really good time for Sunderland.
Yeah, just to go back to a point you made there, because I think it's quite good, and it's again, it was something that was put to Mike Dodds in terms of the young group and them being aware of it. Now, I agree. There's a risk with them being that young that you get to you end up in a run like this, and there's no sign of snapping out of it. Now, this is just my personal view from being obviously at the academy, at the stadium. Weirdly, it doesn't seem to be. It like, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like they're in the middle of a 5-game losing streak from when you're speaking to players, like when you're speaking to the manager. And look, I know at some stage or another, it's going to turn around and they're going to have to win. They're going to have to win. And with every passing week, with every passing game, the pressure's only going to mount. But it's strange just from being around the stadium. There's not sort of like, I don't want to say doom and gloom, but there's not sort of it just doesn't feel like they're on a 5-game losing streak. I don't know if you feel the same thing. It might just be.
I do take that point, and I think I referenced that a little bit in my piece on the website earlier this week. There was almost a bit of confusion at the full-time whistle Tuesday night, wasn't there? Because yes, that was another defeat. It was the signal 5 defeats in a row, pushes you further away from the playoffs. We all know realistically that's the season over. Yet they got applauded off, and that comes through the sort of spirit and the grit and just a bit more of kind of what people want to see from Sunderland in that second half. They had a go, didn't they? The first half, Leicester were really, really good. And me and Scott spoke about this the other day when we did the show. For the first 20 minutes in particular, Leicester were excellent. And I think Mike Dodds has said that. He said that post-match, and I think he said it yesterday in the press conference as well.
Yeah.
Then it kind of drifted to half-time, but then second half, Sunderland really kind of stepped it up, particularly with the 2 changes that came on. Yes, the creative spark probably wasn't there, what's needed, but given what's been lacking, it was a step in the right direction in a weird sense. Fans want to see the team kind of on board. And again, I think Mike Dodds has referenced that. And that's one thing we are saying about the mentality there. You wouldn't say that the players are not playing or not buying into what Mike Dodds is doing. I think the tactical setup in particular is a key aspect of this. If you go back to that Swansea game where Dodds, he shifted it into a back 3, the first 20 minutes, they were all over the place. Yeah. Could have been 3, 4, 5. Went with a very similar system on Tuesday night against Leicester, and it was much more organised, much more coherent, and that's just in the space of 10 days that they bought into that system and against a better side. Let's be honest, Leicester are a better side than Swansea at this moment in time. And certainly in the second half, you saw that really working in their favour, and they got the press right, they got the trigger points right, and that was from people in the starting 11 and on the bench as well. So that does offer some encouragement going into what is obviously another really tough game this weekend. Can they set up the same? We'll come on to the situation with that in a minute in terms of Luke O'Nien being suspended. But yeah, I don't know if you agree with that in terms of off the back of Leicester, it does feel a little bit more upbeat.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that's something that I actually, more the tactical side of thing that I asked Mike Dodds about. Now, to go on your first point, just from, I think we had a comment through last week, didn't we, when we did one of these, is have the players, you speak to the players, have the players sort of down tools, said they don't want to do that. Now, the players are never really going to come out and tell us that, are they? I think you can tell from watching them on the pitch. And I think what's interesting is when you look at this group of players, there's no real sign of that. You can't question the fight. I mean, you saw Chris Riggan in the first 10 minutes. That got the crowd going. That's what you want. And if it takes a 16-year-old to do that, then that should be a message to the rest of the players. Now, I don't necessarily think Sunderland have lacked a fight. I think, we've spoken about it on here. I think maybe they just don't sort of have the same sort of quality that they've had last year. And I think that's sort of well documented. On the back 3 thing, now that for me was a really interesting one because Mike Dodds spoke after the Leicester game about it being a blueprint, didn't he, about how he wants his side to play. So I asked him, I said, because in the game against Leicester, the defeat, you saw the 2 wide centre-halves sort of sitting on number 10s. And Chris Rigg and Job, they weren't wingers, they were number 10s. Now, they had to track, obviously, the runs of Callum Doyle, Trey Hume and Leo Hjelde on the other side. It was more so Trey Hume, but he popped up in central areas. At one point, I think I turned to you and went, what the heck's he doing up there? He was almost leading the line at one point. Now, to some, it might look chaotic, and I get that. Look, when you're not getting a result, it's always going to look like that. But then, for example, if you look at Chris Wilder's Sheffield United, when they were sort of playing with advanced centre halves piling forward. He was sort of the first one to do that. When it doesn't work, you're an idiot, and when it does work, you're a mastermind. Now, Mike Dodds has spoke about that himself, but what's interesting, and a point that I actually agree with him on, is he said, look, I'll hold my hands up for the Swansea defeat. It didn't work. Now, from that Swansea game, he said he'd play a back three again, and he did. Now, I think the main talking point he spoke about was Dan Ballard missing that game. Now, him being included against Leicester, Sunderland looked a lot more solid. As you say, apart from 15 minutes where I thought, oh, here we'll go again. But Dan Ballard's inclusion at the back I actually thought Sunderland were a lot more solid. It allowed Luca O'Nien and Jensen Seal to track the runners. And they were just... The point that Mike Dodds, I'm trying to get to in a roundabout way, that he made was... it was the difference in performance and levels of performance that pleased him from Swansea to Leicester. Now, I agree with them. I think he has to take great pride in that. And that actually shows, okay, it didn't work, but you're playing Leicester, who were top of the league. Now, again, if you look at it all in a run, it's 5 defeats, 3 of those under his watch. But that performance in isolation, I actually thought was pretty good. Again, we just come back to the talking point that we've had all year of lack of a sort of sting up front, and that's where Sunderland find themselves, and they have found themselves all season. Last year, where they were outscoring sides, they're not doing that this year. So that in my opinion, nothing's changed, and I don't think it's time to get on any Mike Dodds pity party or anything like that. And he said he doesn't want anyone to feel sorry for himself, but it's just the reality of the situation where they find themselves.
Yeah, and that's going to be the case until the summer, until things can change, really. And just to go back to that, I totally agree. I've got a tactical bit that's going up on the site this afternoon at Are Sunderland about that, and how Ballard sort of tracked Jamie Vardy, and interesting in the second half as well, Jensen Seal's impact. Now, I spoke to you about this, didn't I, yesterday? I kind of, when you're sitting up there in the press box, didn't necessarily notice as much, but when you go back through the game, in the second half, Seal's impact was really impressive, how it became sort of hybrid from centre back to almost defensive midfield, an area which he did play over in Holland. So make sure you check that out later this afternoon when that goes online. You mentioned Mike Dodds' press conference. You were there yesterday. Beyond that, what were sort of some of the key takeaways for you?
Well, I think, again, it's a frustrating one because his hands are tied, aren't they, in terms of injuries and things like that. Now, another blow sort of to Corey Evans. It said it wasn't a major sort of knock, but he was set for minutes in the under-21s alongside Bradley Dack this week and next. I think Corey Evans, I think they were both set to play on Monday. I think it's Man City they've got, but I think it's just Bradley Dack who will feature then. In terms of Corey Evans, they didn't give a proper time frame on when he'd come back, but it's likely that under-21s Derby game, which is behind closed doors at the Academy Light, will be the next time he features. Now, it's frustrating. I think someone pointed out yesterday when we put it out that Embo's had the same sort of... he picked up an injury on the way back. Now, yes, it's frustrating. It's difficult, isn't it? I don't think any sort of fingers need to be pointed at any medical staff or that sort of thing. I do think it's just part and parcel of it. We spoke about Jack Clarke's robustness and how many minutes he's played. There's a lot of players in that side. Anthony Patterson, I think Trey Hume, players who actually aren't picking up injuries on a great deal. I do just think it's just one of those things.
Particularly with players like Embleton and Evans who've had lengthy layoffs,
Bradley Dack.
They've been really unfortunate with injuries over the course of the last year or so, both of them, haven't they, with the severity of them, and Embleton picking up a couple of little different types of injuries, with him when he was out on a derby. So I do take your point there.
Yeah, and then I think there was a little Chris Rigg question just about his contract, because again I thought he really impressed against Leicester, and it's crazy to think that at 16 years old and you're coming in, you're not looking out of place. I think that is something that Sunderland will be working on in the background, and between now and the end of the season, it's sort of up to the club to say this is the right place for you. Interestingly, again, I think he was posed the question, does he need to play to fend off sort of interest? And the answer was no. If you're good enough, then you'll play. Obviously, the contract talks are out of his hands. It'll be Christian Speakman, etc. But he will have a say. Mike Dodds will have a say, which is interesting. He's always had a say just because he's been part of the first team coaching staff on what they need. Obviously, it wouldn't be the overriding say back then, but he's still involved in those sort of talks now. But so yeah, it was a lengthy press conference. There's quite a lot to digest from it, but I think there's some of sort of the key talking points from it. Just heading into this weekend.
Just on Rig and then looking into this weekend, do you think he will start? I know, like I touched on it with you when we did the team news, and that like someone like him is what the fans need at the moment. Just that little bit of inspiration, and someone to buy into. And like you said, even if it does take a 16-year-old lad to come in and come of age as such, that is what it might take just to keep that enthusiasm with the season kind of petering out. And it's odd, isn't it? Because Sunderland fans have probably, in a way, they've wanted a season of mediocrity at times, to make sure that they're not involved in relegation battles in years gone by. When it's round here, it's obviously frustrating. So you're going to need people like Chris Rigg just to bring that bit of enthusiasm over the next sort of 10 games of the season. Do you think he'll stay in the starting lineup this weekend?
Well, just on that point, I agree to an extent in the sense of I think Mike Dodds actually discussed this yesterday, and he said that I don't think respect was the right word, but I think it just needs to be a level of expectation around what Chris Rigg is going to bring. He's a 16-year-old at the end of the day. He is still like a first-year scholar. So although I think he's a really good player, there's plenty of room to work on. I was actually shocked. I don't know about you. I was shocked to see him start. And I said I don't necessarily think at the minute it's time for experimentation. But I mean, what do I know? Because he went in there and I thought he was outstanding. I thought he was outstanding.
Yeah. Do you think it was as well?
Yeah.
How did that pitch? Harry Winks, a player who's been capped by England 10 times, played in the Champions League, over 100 appearances in the Premier League, played in Serie A, the Europa League.
Yeah.
And he just didn't look out of place, did he?
Yeah, I think the first 10 minutes or so, it's only natural that it took his time to sort of find his way into the game. But second half, when they found him in those pockets of space, now I think at 10, from what I've seen, he's played slightly deeper for the under-21s and in the FA Youth Cup. But I think at 10 is the perfect sort of position for him. He's got endless energy. So I just look at him and sometimes, like Duracell Rabbit, he just does not stop. He's up and down. He's got that little grit that you want from homegrown academy players. That I've got a point to prove here. And I think Michael Beale, before he left, raised an interesting point and he's worked with a lot of young talents. It's keeping that grit and that desire and that point to prove. The players who do end up at the top, they're the ones that keep that the longest, that they're going to be, they've got a real mentality, a world-class mentality to go and show, look, I can end up there. And I think when you look at the teams who've been linked with Chris Rigg, I think it's blatantly obvious that not just his technical ability, etc., but he's going to be such a big talent. It's really important Sunderland keep him at the club. Do I think he'll start this weekend? I actually think he might be rotated out just for a slightly different approach. Now, that's just my personal opinion. I think, interestingly, before Michael Beale left, Mike Dodds said that there was one or two things that he liked from Michael Beale. Now, I noticed, obviously, I wasn't there, so it was just sort of watching on the telly or whatnot, like the highlights on the way back. They sort of set up in a similar position, didn't they? Out of possession with like this 4-2-4 press to stop like a 4-2-3-1. Now it's worked. I don't know if they'll go for something similar or whether they'll do a Leicester and try and match Southampton, because Russell Martin's side, they like to play football, and I actually think a high press would. Southampton concede goals, and I think if you force Southampton into mistakes, then a high press, as we've seen, would probably work. But I think I don't know. I just think it's a pretty big ask away from home, starting away from home. At least at the Stadium of Light, you've got the home crowd on your side. Just my opinion, but I think he'll probably rotate him for someone with a little bit more experience. I still expect him to get minutes. I still expect him. I still think they'll see him from the bench. But yeah, I think an interesting talking point as well is, again, I think it's been all season. Who starts up front? Who starts up front this weekend? Because for me, and I've said this for the past couple of months now, you've got to start with Rusyn, in my opinion. He's just the most experienced. Okay, there's a communication error there, but seemingly, I think what's interesting is from Mike Dodds' first tenure, he started with Job up front. So we've gone from Job into Rusyn, we've had Burstow to Hamir to now where are we again? Like it's crazy. We've called for consistency, and I get, players deserve a chance if they show that. But I just find like we're in a really strange situation yet again. And I feel like, how many times have we had this conversation? It's who starts. And okay, I think Hamir he looks better than he did earlier in the season. But for me, I think Rusyn's got to start, especially if you're going, as I say, to press Southampton away from home. I think his attributes perfectly marry up with what you should look to try and do.
No, I think I agree with that. I think if in the reverse fixture, Sunderland gave up their most possession against any team this season, and I think they had their lowest amount of passes in a game this season, and they won the game 5-0. So that kind of tells you how Southampton set up. And I think Rusyn will work the line and run the channels more than what we've seen from Hamir. And again, I do agree. I think he's. I'm not saying that he's stood out, but he's certainly done more than what we saw at the start of the season. In what have been difficult games down at Norwich and then obviously at home to Leicester. One thing that obviously is going to impact what Mike Dodds can do is the suspension of Luke O'Nien. He's not going to be available. It's a strange one with Luke O'Nien, isn't it? There's so much discourse around dropping back into centre-back this season. Is he a defender? Should he be moved to the right way? Where he started the first season with Sunderland in League One, back in midfield. But I think it's obvious the Sunderland are better with him, and Ballard has been too this season, aren't they?
Yeah. I've been one of those who sort of advocated would I have liked to see him play in a central midfield type role, bring Jensen Seal in. I think, again, this isn't a slight on anyone like Jensen Seal, but I just think, as you say there, Ballard and Luke O'Nien have been the two mainstays. And I think, to be honest, centre-half is his position. I think he's been outstanding since he's been there. I think even in the League One season, I think he was playing centre-half, wasn't he, when at the Papa John's Trophy? I might be my memory might be a bit shoddy because I'm getting on. But yeah, that I think it's interesting, as you say, I think the loss of Dan Ballard was massive in the way Mike Dodds wanted to set up against Swansea. They were vastly improved, albeit 10, 15 minutes against Leicester. That plays into the selection process for this weekend, doesn't it? Because, as I've said, I think one of the major pitfalls of that Swansea defeat, and I don't think he had a good game against Leicester, was Leo Hjelde out on that left side. Now, I think we saw Ronald just got the beating of him pace-wise as a left centre-half, and he was getting in behind. Out on that left-hand side against Leicester, I don't think he had a great game. I actually think centre-half's probably his best position from what I've seen so far. But that would be in a 4 for me, just because I think the extra protection you get either side from your left back. It's interesting whether, a lot of the Mike Dodds' tenure in charge, it's been guessing what I think you can normally guess at a manager's sort of starting 11. And Michael Beale was obviously a 4-3-3. Preferred that. Mike Dodds, just a guessing game. And it keeps, if it's keeping, everybody else on the toes, and it'll certainly keep opposition managers on the toes.
Just on 09, I think we've got a radar there that compares them with the league average, if you want to stick that up. Where do you think some of that criticism's at? Because see there, his numbers and metrics by that compared to the league average, there's not a lot wrong with that. Yeah, it could be better in his aerial duels, but particularly if you've got Dan Ballard alongside you, then that isn't as much a concern. He kind of has justified dropping back into that role, hasn't he?
Yeah, I think interestingly, obviously, just a quick explainer on these radars. So the closer the point is towards the top end of the chart tends to be how well they would fare in comparison to the top 5%, I think it is, or the top percentage of players in the championship. Now, obviously, you've got the league average there. And I think what's interesting is obviously the passing out from, the percentage from the back now.
And that was probably the idea behind him dropping back in there, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Moving out.
Exactly. So, as you say, I think there obviously is concerns just in terms of his aerial ability, but he's certainly no mug. I don't think I've really, in the past couple of months, seen an incident where it's come from Luke O'Nien getting beat to the ball in terms of a header. There's been obviously passing for I think it was the Swansea game. But yeah, as I say, I think that's comparing two defenders as well. So it's not like comparing a versatile midfielder, dropping them in. So that's quite an interesting metric to see Luke O'Nien, who again is in the conversation. Is he a midfielder? Should we put him at right back? That's in comparison to the rest of the defenders in the league. So that bodes pretty well, in my opinion. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? How I'm very interested to see how Sunderland will fare without him, because again, I think they'll go to a back four, and I think it'll be Sealt and Ballard.
Yeah, you've just taken the words out of my mouth there. It's going to be interesting to see how they do fare without him. I mean, are they going to be forced into a back four? I mean, the alternative would be possibly Pembele coming in on the right, Hume shifting back over onto the left, and then having a three of Sealt, Ballard, and Yelder as your centre backs if you were going to keep something like what we saw on Tuesday night. But that almost sounds like you'd be reaching a little bit, wouldn't you? You're really sort of scratching around to try and use that system there. I think I agree. Because of the numbers and the personnel and the way things are going, a four probably suits on this weekend.
Yeah, I think what's interesting as well, you mentioned that Trey Hume, instead of going over to the opposite side, there's also an option, because I think we played there, I think it was under Mowbray, where he's actually slotted in at centre half, didn't he? So he could go right of a back three, and you could have a back three of Ballard, Sealt, and Hume. Yeah. But do I think that they'll do that? I don't think so, because that would then mean that Sealt's middle of a three, you would think, with Ballard over on the left. It's interesting. There's plenty ways that Sunderland can experiment and try and come up with a side that's going to get the result. But I genuinely think that I don't think that they'll experiment too much this weekend. Heading to Southampton, I think, like we say, there'll be structure in a back four. I don't think there'll be too much experimentation down. I think, like you say, Southampton, like a lot of the ball, I do think it'll be Sunderland not trying to play on the counter, because they'll go toe for toe with sides who want to play football. But like you say, I think that's the best avenue for them to get a result.
On that though, I mean, Southampton, you mentioned it earlier in the pod that they score goals and they concede goals. They're fourth in the form table, but they've only won 2 of the last 5. Conceded 15 in the last 10. Sunderland, they can go down there and get at them as such, can't they? On the flip side of that, just for Sunderland, however, a 23rd in the form table with just 2 wins from 10. Only Rotherham, who are obviously on a dismal run of form and going to be relegated back to League One, worse, which is really worrying for Sunderland. Which again just goes full circle in terms of how much they need a win at some point, or at least to stop this losing streak.
Yeah, it's pretty damning, isn't it? I mean, there's no other way to look at it. There's no way to sugarcoat it. They need results. I'm being quick to say I don't think they'll go down, but unless that quickly changes, then they might as well be in a relegation battle. But at the moment, I don't see that happening. I do think they'll pick up results. I think certainly after this weekend, I think if you look at the fixtures, again, they've got QPR now. QPR and themselves are on a really good run of form under their new boss. I think they're unbeaten in 4-1 3 of the last 4. It's pretty. You want them to go to St Mary's and prove a point, and I think what Sunderland have actually done so well at times this season is when the back's been against the wall, they've come up with results. Now this is the one sort of part of the season where we haven't seen that. Now that's maybe why things behind the scenes, there's still a little bit of calmness around it, because they know they can do it. And they've gone toe to toe with Leicester. Yeah, I think in terms of Southampton, if you look at that, they have been beaten at home as well. Beaten 2-1 by Millwall, beaten 2-1 by Hull City. There's an opportunity there, but again, how many times have we said that there's an opportunity? Sunderland need to go there and they need to put in a performance.
I think it's interesting as well there that it's the first time that this squad have been tested this way since coming back up as well, isn't it? I know that they went on a patchy run of form at around about the same time last season. I think they only won 1 in 9 down at Norwich, but the tail wasn't as bunched up below them. It felt at that point that the playoffs were drifting. This time, I think Middlesbrough play QPR this weekend, and then they have that game in hand against Birmingham on Tuesday. So those positions could switch over the course of the next few days. And like you say, if results go against Sunderland this weekend, it can close pretty quickly, and then going into what would then be a really pressure game against Queen's Park Rangers next week. I think just to finish it up, and to move on slightly on a different topic. On the site today, you've done the piece gone up with Sunderland's former kitman Stephen Aziz. Really good conversation. What did you take from that? It was nice speaking to him, wasn't it?
Yeah, he's a really good lad, Stephen. Obviously, we wish him all the best with whatever comes next. So this first piece is obviously his time at Manchester City. He fell out of sort of fell into the role, of being a kit man at Borough. So his full story on there. Part of the sort of, he was assistant kit man at Man City when they won the league. So obviously he was there for that Aguero moment. That was actually one of his final few days at the club. So then it's just obviously his first couple of seasons at Sunderland. We've got a part 2 going out next week, obviously on the League One sort of years relegation from the Premier League. Don't worry, we didn't touch too much on that because I think that's pretty well documented. But just great to speak with him. There's a cheeky little Amad Diallo mention in next week's about a couple of the lads so at the club have been onto him. But I'll save that for the piece next week. Really good to speak to him. We'll then have the full pod going out to subscribers to We Are Sunderland. So if you haven't yet, you can subscribe to We Are Sunderland. Just £1 for 6 months worth of coverage. You get the exclusive interviews. You can listen to the pod if you prefer. That'll be going out maybe 2 weeks' time. But great to speak to him. Really good bloke. And wish him all the best.
Spot on, Matty. I've enjoyed that this morning. Safe travels down to Southampton tomorrow, and make sure that you tune in and listen to Matty's coverage as Sunderland take on Southampton this weekend, and we'll be back to review what happens down at St Mary's next week. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.